Okay, welcome to the Staunch. This is our first episode. I'm Jacob Stevens and my co-host Ross Wade.
Howdy ho.
And our first guest here today is State Representative Shane Lindauer. So welcome, Shane.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm honored to be the first guest here, so appreciate that.
Yeah, and really we wanted Shane to be our first guest because, I just told him off air here that he does a really good job of communicating to the public, like what's going on, what he's doing, and he's very accessible, right? So, I mean, there's so many times where, I'll text him, I have a question, he'll answer it within usually 24 hours, 48 hours, and that's not to brag about anything, but you can do, like with any congressman, state senator, state representative, you can do that, and people just don't know. So, as part of the show, hope people gain confidence that what you say, what I say to Shane, what Ross says to Shane, to whether it's Larry Bouchon, Mike Braun, whoever, it matters and it sticks in their head. So, yeah.
Well, and not just that, but Shane is our first guest because he's probably the staunchiest politician that I know. Avid gun lover, has passed some bills that are very useful for the movement that I know that we support. So, very fitting guest.
Yeah, Ross, why don't you give him a definition of the staunch?
So the staunch, by definition, is being loyal and committed in attitude. I guess what I would define the staunch as is, as this world continues or possibly may continue to dilapidate, the staunch are the people that you would call in a crisis, and they would be dependable, loyal, and committed to serving whatever mission that is. And, this is a conservative podcast, I'll say, right? Am I allowed to say that? I'm canceled already.
Absolutely.
Canceled already. But
I'm out.
Can't polarize anything. No, but so the staunch are people who are not critics, but they're useful, which you just answered that question. You text Shane, and he texts you right back. He's not this big-headed, arrogant politician that, wants to just flag his name around, but he's useful. He answers and wants to be a servant of the community. So
yeah, not to pump him up too bad, but he's just like a regular dad, just wants to like do the right thing, right? So
I think that to that we're excuse me we're as elected officials we are truly to be servants of the people that we represent, and I try to communicate that to people all the time. My regular line, it sounds cliche, but I truly try to live it, is I work for you. Now, I work for you doesn't mean that I'm going to do everything you want me to do or vote everywhere you want me to vote, but I try to, what I try to tell everybody with I work for you is my job is to listen to you and give you a hearing and hopefully come to some, amicable agreement or disagreement. At least you'll know where I stand, and go from there. So, but to your point, Jacob, yeah, it's I think encouraging people to reach out, it does make a difference. As a state representative, I can tell you if you reach out to me directly, or Ross, you reach out to me directly, it's going to make a bigger difference than shooting a kind of a form email that we've all seen, right? I'm not saying those things don't make a difference, but building personal relationships as much as we can. And again, we can't have personal relationships with, I represent roughly 65,000 people. Can't have personal relationships with all those folks. But the more that, we reach out and do those things and try to be actively engaged in the process, that was what our country was built for, was an active and engaged populace. And so certainly encourage your listeners to do that. And informed populace.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Informed, not misinformed.
yeah, and just so real quick for listeners, can you? I know we just redistrict, so it might be confusing, but what do you represent? Like, what towns do you represent?
So it's roughly kind of Jasper over. It was Petersburg, but now the redistricting, I kind of bump up against Petersburg, but not exactly. So a little bit of Pike County, like Otwell is kind of the main population center there, and then up here to Washington, and then going back east, Montgomery, Shoals, Lagodi area, and then back down to Washington. So it goes up toward Odin, doesn't quite catch Odin, but I represent all of Martin County now in the new district, where before I missed the northern section there. So
Okay. Okay, awesome. So we'll transition into kind of getting to know Shane a little better. Let's talk about wife, kids,
Yeah.
hobbies.
Yeah. So I'm married to my wife, Stacy, just 23 years. A few days ago, was our anniversary. So two sons that we love dearly. And my wife and I recently started a small business. It's called Beehive Assisted Living Homes. It's actually in Huntingburg. And so we are battling through a new business startup right now, which is anybody who's done that, the labor situation is challenging right now, and so we're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so we have to be staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and so that's kind of where we're at from a work standpoint. I've been in a small business owner for most of my professional life, I guess. Prior to this, I was in a small family business in the recycling industry. So I think that's the common story, right? You go from recycling to assisted living. You guys have heard that story 1,000 times in life, probably, right? Yeah.
Pretty specific.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a long, winding road on that story, but I won't bore you with those details now. But in any case, a background in small business ownership, and so live have a Jasper address, live out in the country. We've got a few acres outside of Jasper and a little hobby farm. My wife and my boys, obviously, and then my friends kind of jokingly call it our compound because we've got several family members that live out on about 80 acres that my grandfather owned out on the west side of Jasper. So my grandparents are out there close. I've got a couple aunts and uncles close. So.
One of my dreams is to have my own compound.
I love it. I love it. I'll take it.
A family compound.
Yeah,
I hear a lot more conservatives these days talk about having a commune compound.
Yeah.
So that's how they used to do it, right? Where they would have in-laws on each side, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, my boys, run out of the back door and can run over to my parents, their grandparents' house,
awesome.
and my grandparents, their great grandparents' house, can be there without crossing a county road, so just running through a field or up a driveway or something. So it's we're very blessed to have that situation.
Well, it's way more of a family-oriented family, I guess you could say. That's typically how older generations of people did it. I mean, even with a grandma living in the house to help with the kids,
Right.
It leads to, I think, a better quality family. But when you say the word compound, obviously it's got some sort of
Negative
connotation to it. Yeah. So,
yeah.
But
I don't want to give the wrong idea. There's no walls or fences or barbed wire, but except for the cattle. It is kind of a lot of relation that live in a very tight knit area, and as you say, Ross, it's some people kind of laugh at us, and my wife is the in-law, and so they think, how could you, do you want to be that close to your in-laws? And fortunately, my parents have been, again, just a huge blessing to us and really help raise our boys, and so anyway, I think I don't want to speak for my wife, but I think she enjoys living out there as well. So
yeah, well, that's awesome.
Well, I think it's a better representation of kind of the direction we'd like to go as Americans, instead of, oh, well, this kid moved to a different town. They live in this big box in a subdivision 100 miles away, and then this kid moved another 100 miles away, and then mom and dad are by themselves. And, so I think it's a good way to mature the family. So,
yeah. We said, we count ourselves very blessed. So,
yeah. Okay. So to transition back into the political side, how do you go from a dad, husband to county council, and then how do you go from there to state rep? And well, I guess the better question is, I like to ask this to people: what was your red pill moment where you were like, okay, I'm not going to just go to the polls every year. I'm going to get involved and do something about it?
So I'm not sure I'm allowed to say this, but so I did not grow up as a church-going person. Went to church a couple times in my life growing up. Loved my childhood, but church was not part of it. And in college, I became Christian, accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And
awesome.
My position changed in that I felt that we need to be a good steward of what God has given us. Whether that's, we kind of off air, we're talking about our finances, our health, our bodies, but also our system of government. I think we have a unique system of government in world history in that really we the people, are the government. And I think that's something that we miss in society a lot today. I'm a representative, but I'm not supposed to be the government. We all sitting here are supposed to be the government. And that goes back to, I think, what we said earlier, where we need to be an informed and engaged populace, and informed and engaged people, and we are to be actively involved in it. So when I became Christian, it was to me, being a good steward of what God had given us was taking part, educating myself, and being informed. So that's, I didn't know if I'd ever go into politics at that point, but I followed it. I was engaged. I'm a little ashamed to say at the time, I was more on a national level. And since then, I've seen really, again, the design of our nation is, one of federalism and decentralization. We need to be more involved at the local level, frankly. Mm-hmm. And the federal level should have less sway and ability to impact us. That was by design. I'm not saying that's how it is, unfortunately, but by design, we were to be more engaged at the school board level, at the city council level, at the county council levels. And I can tell you, we can affect change a lot faster there than we can at the state level, and certainly at the federal level. So, so my position has kind of changed since, kind of following politics more, in that, we have this idea that the higher up the chain you go, the more important you are. And certainly there's more people you represent, and there's, more issues that come before you, no doubt about that. But I think, it's equally as important to be involved certainly there's been a lot of school board talk over the last few years, and how important those things can be. So I'm not sure what your question was, Jake, but that's where I'm going. So.
Yeah, no, you answered. It was, how you went from like basically being on the sidelines like most of us are, and to I got to run for office and do something about it and affect change in your own way that you're called to do.
Yeah, and I guess that was the other part of it. I didn't know if I'd run for politics, but the opportunity presented itself, and there were a couple openings initially on county council in Du Bois County, and just really prayed about it and felt like it would be a good opportunity. And then I did that for one term, stepped out because I moved out of the district that I represented on county council, and moved into the other area. I thought the county councilman was doing a fine job. I didn't, feel the need to be in politics just to be in it. And then when the state representative position came available, Mark Messmer, who I think some of your listeners will probably know, was the state representative in District 63 at one point. He's now the state senator. I think it's District 47. But anyway, he asked if I would, be willing to consider the spot. So that's how I got here. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
That's the exact solution to, I think, the major problem that we were talking about before we started airing here. Was there's this huge gap for people that see things on a federal level and think, man, this country's screwed up, but where do you start? Well, a politician that steps in wanting to take action and responsibility, I think, is the solution to that, because then you start seeing more boots on the ground and how that affects things here locally. Well, I do want to commend you for that, because oftentimes you see politicians that just want to be a politician, and then it turns into a career, instead of saying, okay, I don't like the path the United States is on. This is the whole purpose of the show, right? So the whole purpose of the show is to reach out to all those people out there. I think the major majority of Americans feel like what they're doing doesn't really change things. It kind of feels like shooting at the moon. You're off by 1 degree. It just feels like there's too much that can go wrong, or you're too far away. So that's sort of the purpose of the show, is to help educate those younger people on how to take action locally. So
yeah, to that point, I was on, like I said, my days on county council, 4 years. I did a 4-year term there, and I can count on one hand how many times we had people show up to a county council meeting. I mean, it was, and when they did, it was 1 or 2 people, because
Right.
it was something that impacted their neighborhood or something to that effect. So, but I could also tell you, if you had even 10 people or 15 people show up to a county council meeting on an issue, that's going to make some noise at the county council level, all right? I mean, again, at the State House, I'm not in any way trying to discourage people from emailing your state legislators or getting involved, but, you're on a neighborhood of thousands or hundreds, or for sure, or thousands of people that, are emailing and calling and coming to the State House and petitioning and lobbying us there, which, again, I'm not saying that's wrong. You should do those things, but you can, again, impact change. I'll say it again, impact change a lot more. School boards, city councils, county commissioners, those kind of things. So.
Well, and we are living in a populist. We were talking about this prior to the show too, as well. We're living in a populist age where it's really, really easy to be a critic. It's really, really easy to sit behind the keyboard or sit behind your phone, take a shot at someone high up. And we have all types of people like that. The world is not short of critics. The world is short of useful people. Whereas showing up to your county councilman meeting, having a criticism, takes a lot more balls to do that. Or, I'm sorry, a lot more courage to show up.
You can say that.
Okay. Sorry. We knew we'd have to kind of tone me down a little bit. I'm working on that. But, yeah, so given your background, your journey, where things have got you up to this point, other than just showing up to the city council meetings, showing up to the county council meetings, any other insight about just where to get started for somebody that maybe doesn't have a substantial business background or hasn't already established themselves? What are like the easy, low-hanging fruits for a younger person to care more or get more involved?
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure this will directly answer your question, but I don't think that you've got to be a business person per se. I don't think you have to have any kind of special education or anything, but I think you kind of mentioned, being a critic, right? And again, certainly as an elected official, we're not immune from criticism, right? That's part of the process, absolutely. So I'm not trying to say don't be critical, but the people who are critical of me, but I will still listen to and will take input from, are the people who have properly looked at the issue and kind of educated themselves both ways and come at it from a reasonable, let's talk about this thing. And so to that
solution seeking.
Yeah, solution seeking. And again, I said earlier, maybe we're not going to walk away agreeing. I'm not promising that, but at least I can tell you from my experience, fortunately I had a not pleasant conversation with a constituent on the phone yesterday. This person was not, not friendly, not seeking solutions, really just wanted to kind of throw bombs, so to speak. And so we did not have a constructive conversation, and there's nothing good was going to come of that conversation, So those kind of things are not helpful for public dialogue, public debate. And ultimately, if they're not helpful for those things, they're not going to be helpful for society, generally speaking. And so, I'm not saying don't bring your passion. I mean, we can be passionate, and I don't have a problem with people who are passionate, but it's got to be kind of passion under control, and so I guess to try to answer your question, it's just educating ourselves on the issue and making sure that we, to the best that we can, have kind of looked at all sides and tried to be fair to all sides, and not just taken a soundbite that they heard or a headline that they read in the newspaper and forming their entire opinion off of that. Mm-hmm. You've got to dig into things a little bit more oftentimes, and then coming at it as, hey, tell me why you did this. And again, I'm not trying to tell people what to do here, right? And I'm not trying to tame people down so much, but I'm just telling you from my perspective how I engaged and how I think it's more productive to be engaged is, let's try to understand each other. Again, you can be passionate, but just kind of bring that passion under control a little bit, and really, so I guess just educating yourself on, and again, I don't have any superior knowledge or anything. I mean, I was not, like I said, I just a kind of a country boy, grew up, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, but we can all educate ourselves on different issues and approach it that way. So,
well, communication is key, right? Like if I come to you and I say, hey, I don't really agree, this is what I think, you're probably going to try to help me to get there to where maybe we walk away in disagreement, but instead people, I watch on Facebook all the time, people comment on some of your stuff that has nothing to do with your post, and they're like, they want to destroy you. They don't want to. They want to do
personal.
Yeah, they want to take you down to the ground and start fighting. Right? It has nothing to do with like what you actually posted.
I think criticism coupled with, I guess what I'm saying is, I try not to criticize unless I have a solution ready. And the criticism in itself is never a personal criticism. It's, hey, there's a problem and we need to solve it. I would attack the problem and not the person. And that means if you're willing to attack the problem, say the problem is 100% of the issue, well, now I have someone lifting 50% of the problem with me instead of depleting my energy and criticizing me or you or whoever, and not helping the problem at all. So that's sort of the attitude part of the show. We're here to solve problems. We're not here to be right.
Yeah, that's kind of going back to the conversation I had yesterday. It really came down to questioning one another's motives. This person and I vehemently disagreed on an issue, and it was kind of the personal attack, and it was really just the presumption that I had ill intent on an issue. And I said to the person, I said, look, I'm not questioning your motives. I think your heart is probably in the right place. I disagree with you strongly, but I think your heart's probably in the right place. I'm not questioning your motives. And so, I think that a lot of times we ascribe, ill intent to people who feel differently about an issue. And don't get me wrong, there are some people out there who ill intent is the name of the game, right? I'm not naive to that.
Yes.
But I think many times ill intent is not the motivation behind why somebody, like in my position, will vote one way or not vote one way. And so if we can clear out that and then find an area of agreement, which I can almost always find some area where I agree with people,
something to stand on.
Something to stand on, right? That's a great way to put it. And then kind of build out from there. So here's where we are. Here's what we agree on. We're not so different, maybe. And then, but here's where we diverge. And I understand you. You understand me. We're not going to get there, but we're again, society, generally speaking, kind of one relationship at a time is going to be better off.
The two words that pop out in the Staunch to me are being loyal and committed. And it's hard to be committed to a movement or committed to the wealth and prosperity of a nation when you're not willing to commit on a relationship level locally. It's just that type of attitude just brews useless criticism, like what we were saying. So, when you said the word relationship, I think that's kind of the buzzword that I needed to hear on how to make these changes and solve these problems. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add when you said relationships.
Kind of loop it back to your original question on how do you get involved, right? So
that's where I was. Yeah, exactly.
I have personal experience getting involved, right? And I'll loop in my faith in here too. I used to live in Newburgh in Warwick County. I tried to move to Nashville. I tried to move to Indianapolis. Every time something would happen that would pull me back in and keep me closer to home, right? And like one day, and people will listen and be like, whatever, but I'm literally running. There's some work trails. You got to check them out. Pretty nice. I was running on the trails, and I'm like praying as I'm running about whether I should leave my job or not. And I literally did a shuffle on my iPhone, and Stay a Little Longer by Brothers Osborne comes on. I'm like, what the world? So I took that as a sign, and I stayed in Newburgh for another year, sold my house, pretty good profit, came back home to get closer to all my family, right? And as soon as I got here, it was very evident what the plan was, right? It was, there's not a Young Republicans in Daviess County, Indiana, which is the most read part of our state going back to the 2020 election data. So I said, okay, I know our GOP chairman. I know the vice chairman is my grandpa. So I'm going to start talking to them about this. So I did that, right? I got involved. And what did that do? Not Jacob started Young Republicans. It networked. It brought me Ross. It brought me other people.
Congratulations.
But we've developed a good friendship, but it brought other people together, past, present, future. And, I ended up meeting Shane, some other politicians. And now, I know, I'm very confident that I can reach out to a lot of politicians and be like, hey, would you mind coming on this podcast? Just because I networked and it's like like your neural network's working, right? You make one connection, like, oh, well, they know this person, right? And so I think that's a best way to get involved is just literally like throw yourself out there, even if it's outside of your comfort zone. Some of the best things come out being outside of your comfort zone, right? And you just kind of work it from there.
Perfect. And I'll add one more thing. In your life, you may know 1,000 people. Or let's say it this way. You may have meaningful, substantial reactions with 1,000 people. And those 1,000 people are going to know 1,000 people.
Right.
So that puts you one person away from being able to change the lives of 1 million people. So I know a lot of staunch conservatives who, since 2020, may have moved back home, and all they did was buy more AK-47 rounds. You know, and there is one side to that that's right. Yeah, I stocked up on ammo as well, and that seems to be like the, oh, well, I'm a conservative and I'll back, don't tread on me attitude. It's a great attitude. I love it. But the more manly, strong, responsible thing to do is to say, who do I need to reach out to? How can I get involved to help solve this problem? Not just stock up on ammo and wait for the country to start burning to pieces,
Right.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing to it as well. Talking about what we're talking about, maybe for somebody who's not engaged or not involved currently, may seem kind of daunting. And so I would say too, just pick an area, right? I mean, you don't have to, go to county council meetings and school board meetings and write your state representative and write U.S. senator and call the president. You don't have to do all those things. I mean, certainly, welcome to do all those things, but, really just focusing your time on, an issue or an area and getting involved there first, and then it doesn't seem so daunting, right? And I think that is also something that is important. And if you're going to pick an area, again, like I said earlier, I would do it locally, because you can have a bigger impact locally than on, like I said, higher up the chain. And again, there's a lot of important issues. Again, I mentioned the school board thing. Those are really important issues. Our next generation, how they think and how they interact with the world is going to be crucial for our nation going forward. So that would be an area I would encourage people to educate themselves on, the history of our nation, the true history of our nation, and warts, flaws, good to bad, right? And then go forward from there. So,
another thing is getting people to care. When I look at I'm a big history guy. I look at cycles quite a bit. Obviously there's a real obvious cycle. It's an 80-year cycle. It's about 4 generations. You've heard the poem, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times again. So that's a real obvious 80-year cycle. If you look at 2024 and you go back 80 years, you're in 1944, World War II. Go back 80 years, you're in American Civil War. Go back 80 years, you're in 1776, the American Revolutionary War. How do we break these cycles of change? And even a bigger cycle than that is, I think America's 246 years old or something like that, and most democracies start to crumble at year 250 for some reason. And I think it's just because when a country is born, it's a very intolerant nation. It's a very strong nation made up of like makers. Most of them own their own farm, own their own business, they want the brunt of the failure when it goes bad, but they want all the reward when it goes well. And over time, people learn to vote free stuff. And so at the end of and this is a tangent, by the way, but I'm just saying, how do we get people to not only acknowledge that, but to care? Because when I look at that 250-year cycle, one of the very last stages of that cycle before it starts to repeat itself back to bondage is apathy. And it doesn't take a genius to look out there today and just realize that we're assuming right now in this conversation that people care. Like, we're telling you how to get involved because you care. But I'm telling you, I work with younger guys that work for me, and it's so abundant and good here in this all-star of a first world nation that they don't care because life's always been great. But I think as the economic temperature continues to change, social change will definitely happen. And so where do you start to get people inspired to actually care before it's already to a point where it's like, hey, you have to care now, you know? So that's the big question.
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah, that's good because I don't. I don't know. You know, I think it could be what you guys are doing here as part of that, right? It's you know, random conversations, relationships we're having. I think we have a tendency to look to, and I certainly am guilty of this too. Look to some sort of we've talking before, like a George Washington, right? We're looking to this political person, this political leader that's going to, you know, do this for us, kind of fix this for us, and make everything right. And again, I think that when we do that, we misunderstand again how our nation. If we're looking to a person, a kind of a king, so to speak, outside of, you know, Jesus Christ, right? If we're looking to a person, then we're missing it a little bit. We're missing it a lot, I would say. We are supposed to be the solution. We are supposed to be the government. And I don't know how to get there, Ross, to answer your question directly, but other than just keep encouraging people and you know, to get engaged and get involved. So
yeah, my biggest advice to people, and people probably don't want to hear this either, but is, you know, you saw a lot of conservatives attach themselves to Donald Trump during 2020. I voted for Donald Trump, proud of it, but he wasn't perfect, right? And in my opinion, he wasn't the greatest leader. He had some great policies that I agreed with, along with some of his foreign policies that his administration was trying to put in place. But do not attach yourself to any one man, because they will always disappoint you, no matter who it is. I mean, it could be your dad or grandpa, right? They're always going to fall short of like what you think of them. But the one that doesn't is Jesus Christ, right? So if you keep that as number one, you'll never be disappointed, because you'll always have him as your backbone instead of like a human being, right? So
I've been kind of I'm taking a little tangent, I guess, I think it kind of speaks to the question, though. You know, several times, and I'm a Republican, and so what are my thoughts on Donald Trump, or what do I think about Donald Trump? And my answer is always the same. I've sworn an oath 3 times now, once in the military, once for county council, and once for state representative, and I've never sworn an oath to Donald Trump or any other man, right? My allegiance is to the Constitution of the United States. And so, again, I think we can love Donald Trump, and I'm kind of like you, Jacob. I mean, I think he did a lot of great things. You know, I certainly have my opinions on the current administration and my disapproval of them. And I think we'd be in a lot better place. Again, not to get too political here, but my allegiance is to the Constitution, and outside again of Jesus Christ, my earthly allegiance is to the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution of the state of Indiana. So those were written by people much more intelligent than me, and so if those are not our guide, we're just making this stuff up as we go, and that's not a good way to do government. So
yeah,
and that's the foundation, right? I mean, so we're starting to see a little bit of the foundation crack on the house, and you know, do you stop the damage where it's at, or do you try to correct it altogether? And I think it's kind of hard when, first of all, 80 million votes did not happen. But even if it really was 51-49, we're now in what I would call a 51% tyranny. You know, so it's democracy with lipstick on. We're supposed to be a republic, right?
Yeah.
So now I think, I mean, number one, getting people to care. Number two, teaching them how to actually be effective, what to do with that. Like you said, you don't want them to lack passion.
Right.
You know,
absolutely.
But come with a problem-solving attitude and you know, take this thing by the horns.
Okay, yeah. So Shane, if you could, I know we had a special session for tax refund or abortion bill. If you could talk about, those are actually the only two I'm aware of,
Correct.
To be honest. But
yeah, so it was what ended up passing was SB 1, which was the bill dealing pretty much exclusively with the issue of abortion, and then SB 2, which had kind of two components. You might say that the automatic taxpayer refund that have started going out now was kind of one component, and then I don't don't know if the backside is the right word to say, but the second component of SB2 was a lot of money. I have a cheat sheet here. I had it written down. I thought, I apologize. It was roughly $6 million went out to help women and children, presumably now with the passage of SB1. Abortion is going to be more difficult. There will be more babies born. And so how do we cover some of that? How can we help women? How can we help the babies that are born? How can we help families? So we decided that the state put a lot of money toward those things, whether it be adoption credits have gone up substantially, and money for mental health and money for pregnancy centers and things like that went in there as well. So in SB2. So
Yeah, which I found, and my wife is the expert on this, but I found that pregnancy centers are like way undervalued. Like, I don't think people are aware. Everybody talks about Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood probably does some good things, but the agenda behind it is what I think makes it not so good, right? But the pregnancy care centers do offer really good resources,
and you've got a great one here in Washington.
Absolutely,
it's wonderful. They do fantastic. Had an opportunity to tour that. It's been a couple months ago now, but I was just amazed, blown away with the resources that they offer and what they're doing there in the community. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of contractors and businesses pour a lot of effort into that, and I'm definitely proud of what we have here, especially here in southern Indiana. I think we're very well represented in that. I'll just back up here on a macro level. Is it not obvious what maybe, I guess, me as an individual, when I step back and look at the world from a 30,000-foot view, and we're looking at this virus thing, we're looking at abortions, we're looking at baby formula running short. Am I a conspiracy theorist to think that it's just a game of sheer numbers where they're trying to decrease the human population? I mean, I don't read that all the time, but how far off am I on that? I
don't know if that really meets the definition, but I would call that similar to eugenics, right? That, Planned Parenthood was started by Margaret Sanger, who was a proud eugenist.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask. Yes.
And her whole goal was to get women to fight for their own abortion, and she has succeeded. And you break it down into the details, right? And I'll talk about the black community. I'm not targeting black people at all, but I'm just representing facts, right? I think, and I'll use my own cheat sheet here, but black community had 18.7 billion or 7 million abortions from 65 to 2018, which represents 42% of their population. For comparative purposes, white people 14%, Hispanics 15%, right? Imagine if they weren't targeted, because I don't know why, except for Margaret Sanger was a eugenist, and she believed in creating the perfect gene pool, right? We've heard so many other awful leaders in the past.
Tyrants, yes.
Right? So
imagine if Hitler would have had viruses.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But, to my point, she succeeded, and imagine if black people weren't targeted, right? If she didn't exist, their population would be closer to 25, 30%, and they would be more wealthy. There'd be all these resources that would have come back to them because of that. And it has nothing to do with racism, like from our standpoint. It's somebody's agenda from a long time ago, and I don't want to deviate too much, but just like I'll call it the trans ideology and the CRT, that starts from a academic person saying, like, I think their intent is evil, but I have this theory. Let's test it on people, and let's test it on babies and stuff like that. And it's just no place for it here, right? So
it's behavioral experimentation.
Yeah,
it's mass behavioralism. Yeah. So this is one of my tendencies. I do take a 30,000-foot view of everything, and a lot of times what I insert into the show will be on a macroscopic scale instead of how do we win here as conservatives with this bill? what's the progress, what's the information, make sure our listeners know exactly what's going on. But just want to back up and apologize. I know sometimes I can make it very
No
broad,
apology necessary.
but at least I asked the question. I said, "Am I conspiracy theorist?" But no, I think it's great what we're pushing for. I think we're putting a dent in that agenda by allowing more babies to be born. I mean, when an adult passes away, that's one person, but when babies pass away, it could be 10 persons. I mean, maybe back in the old days, but more like 4 persons now. So yeah, I think that movement, we need to continue to spearhead that.
Right. Yeah. It was the whole debate, the issue. So SB1 did pass, and one of the key things it did was basically eliminate the ability for Planned Parenthood to perform abortions. So now any abortions that are performed in the state of Indiana should go to, and I said should because there's a caveat I'll talk about here in a moment, but should go to a hospital or a hospital-owned outpatient center, right? And so from a protection of, the women's standpoint, they're going to get much better health care at a hospital or an outpatient center. We heard just horrible stories from women who had abortions in their past and had gone to, Planned Parenthood centers, and some of the things that, they experienced were not pleasant, to say the least, excluding what the baby experienced, which is a whole other story there. So, so that's kind of one thing that the bill did when it finally passed. And so, yeah, it was hours and hours of testimony, hours and hours of debate on the bill, as it should be. It's been an important and a divisive and a hot topic, obviously, to say the least, for decades in this country. And so there were some of us, and I was one of them, that hoped that if the Supreme Court did what it ultimately did, that the governor would call us back in for special session and we'd have an opportunity to address the issue as quickly as possible. We wanted to do it right? I mean, you don't want to mess that bill up, and I'm still not sure we got it 100% right, but if the thinking is, we're saving actual human lives, which science tells us we are. Embryology is very clear that from the moment of conception, it's a separate and distinct human being there, that we need to, as a government official, my perspective, my opinion is, it's not my opinion, it's in the constitutions, but one of our primary roles as government is protection of the populace. And so I think that includes the born and the unborn. So it was important to me that we get rolling on that as soon as possible. So
yeah, I mean, it's a huge win. And I think for hopefully people listen to this that are on both sides or moderate, and there's a lot of Republicans that are
absolutely
pro-choice, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But one thing I want to make clear, like from a level-headed pro-life perspective, we don't believe that if you're a woman and you choose to have an abortion that you're bad. That's not what we think.
Right.
We think you're misinformed, misguided, maybe don't have the proper resources, which is a big one. It's an emotional decision, right? Absolutely. So that doesn't mean you're bad, and you can always come back from that. I know a handful of women that have went through that, and they come back and they're beautiful people. So they're not cast out. It's nothing like that. And I think that's a misconception, is like Republicans want to like do away with them and prosecute women, which is not true. And this SB1 clearly makes that statement that women, I'm probably misrepresenting it a little bit, but women are not going to be punished. It's the doctors, not like full out, but like there's some caveats to that, I think.
Right.
But
yeah, there's no punishment to a woman who makes that decision. The doctor is subject, if they've performed an illegal abortion. There's the governing board of doctors will the doctor could stand to lose their license if it's proved that they performed an illegal abortion. So, right. To your point, I mean, we heard, again, like I said a minute ago, hours and hours of testimony on this issue. What it keeps coming back to for me, there are a lot of heartbreaking stories, very difficult issues when you get into the abortion issue. As a Republican, I'm accused of all kinds of things for my stance on this issue. But really, for me, it just comes back to what I said a moment ago. It's that one central issue, which is really the only question we should be debating initially. And I'm not saying there aren't hard other very difficult issues that we need to work through on this issue, but is it a human being or not? I mean, and that's, for me, I can't get around that. And again, embryology is very clear. We hear all kinds of things lately in the last few years about trust the science, trust the science, trust the science. Well, this is one where I can pretty clearly look at the science and trust the embryo. There's, the embryology textbooks, from the moment of conception, it's a separate and distinct human being.
Right.
There's, it's got everything it needs to continue to grow and thrive if the conditions are left as they should be. So, that is the place we need to start. And then, are there other issues, other difficult issues that we need to work through on that? Yeah, and talk about on that, absolutely. And how do we support women going through that? But if somebody can explain to me, how it's not a human being that we're, ending the life of, then I'll certainly listen. But again, after hours of testimony, nobody was able to do that. So
I love your comment in there about supporting the women, right? Because I hate commenting on things like this about women because it feels like, oh, I don't have a dog in the fight. But when really, obviously a lot of men steer away from answering this question about abortion for that very reason. They're scared of the criticism that may follow, or, women should choose. Well, then there you go. You're back to pro-choice. But it's not about that. It's about making abortion harder or impossible or whatever. That movement is going to require more responsibility from the men. So from an evolutionary standpoint, or from just how we evolve as a culture, if it were impossible or harder to get an abortion, maybe the female sexual selection process would be better, which would be a win for all of humanity. We're making it too easy to not bear responsibility. And so that's why I support pro-life.
Right. And another misconception, so if you look at both sides, and if your heart is in the right place on both sides, which it can be, in my belief, it can be.
It's a difficult, I understand.
On the pro-life side, and it sounds like you guys believe it's about the baby, right? There's a lot of pro-choice Republicans who are not saying, oh, I think we should have mass abortion, right? They don't like it either, but they're saying it's about my body. And I can work with somebody. You can have an intelligent conversation with someone that says, well, I think it's about me, or I think it's about the baby. Now, we're probably not going to ever agree. I've never changed anybody's mind, and I probably won't. But I can work with people who, they're more thinking well, it's my body. And that's not, I don't agree with that, but I can work with you instead of the hateful of I'm a piece of crap because I want to control a woman's body. And that's not what we're trying to do.
No.
To your point, right?
Right.
That's not what we're here for.
Yeah, I think, some of the disagreements I've had with folks, and I mentioned earlier, kind of trying to find that common ground or not ascribing ill intention to people. Even on this issue, I think a lot of the people that I've talked to who disagree say, well, what about all these kids now that are not taken care of, and they're not going to have good homes. And,
right.
And so for me, I think there's a lot of people, again, I disagree with this, but who their heart's in the right place. They don't want to see children suffer, right? They don't want to see children unwanted and unloved and without families, without stable homes. And so I can certainly look at that, to your point, Jacob, and say that person's heart is in the right place. They just want kids to be wanted and loved, right? And I agree with that. I do too. However, there's still that fundamental foundational issue of then where do we draw that line, on right. when we can eliminate human beings and not eliminate human beings.
Gosh, that's the best way of saying it right there.
So that to me is where kind of the rubber meets the road. And so I'm not trying to be heartless or callous to women, certainly who oftentimes, and again, we heard a lot of testimonies in very, very difficult situations that I would not wish on anyone. But there's also a separate human being involved when pregnancy has happened, when conception has happened. And so as a government official, we have to take that human being's life into account as well. It's not one person anymore. It's two human beings at that point. So,
Right. And okay, so I'll transition to some other misconceptions that I think people should know, because you see stuff on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and it's just a misrepresentation. And one of the biggest tweet that was copy and pasted and just totally false is the 3 things of ectopic abortions, which are not considered abortions. You can go on Planned Parenthood's website, and it's a I wrote down the definition so I don't make anybody mad, but an egg attaches somewhere besides the uterus, usually through the fallopian tube, right?
Or something, yeah.
And this happens, but it's rare. I think 2 out of 100, so less than 1% of the time, or I guess 2% time it happens, right? And the others are a septic uterus, which I think is just from unsafe medical procedures, and it may go to your point where you were talking about, instead of having it in a clinic, having it in a hospital, you have better care, but that's less than 1%. And the other is miscarriages, right? If they have to perform that operation where they have to, get the remain, that's not an abortion. That's not considered an abortion. That is a procedure and a medical treatment for miscarriage. And my heart's with anybody that goes through that. I've been through one myself, and it's not fun, but that's not an abortion, and that's totally is away from what we're talking about here, right? So
Yeah, it is, and whether you consider it an abortion or not, and I've certainly heard the point you're making there, Jacob. That was again the misconception, the stuff I saw the stuff on Facebook too on how we're going to make all that illegal. That was never contemplated. I mean, it was just one of those things of seeing something on social media, and unfortunately, a lot of people shared and liked and did all those things that were never true, were never contemplated, were never part of the bill. I mean, you can, those situations were legal before. There's an exception in the bill for life of a mother. So if OB sees that the mother's life is in danger, they can make a reasonable decision there. Right. And some people, frankly, didn't like that. Some people thought that was maybe too much of a window. If you have a abortion-inclined OB who might say, the mental health of this woman is in jeopardy, and so we need to allow an abortion. So, there's a difficult line there when you're actually making public policy, because you don't want a doctor in a hospital room having to look up Indiana code on what they can and can't do, right? So we've got to find, again, that kind of that common ground where a doctor can make, in the heat of battle, so to speak, a reasonable decision and come, and the goal is, though, to save both humans, right? Understanding that sometimes the least bad option has to be taken, which is
the lesser of two evils.
The lesser of two evils, exactly. Kind of a triage situation at that point, right? And so the stuff about ectopic pregnancy and septic uterus and all that stuff was never on the table, never even remotely considered as being made illegal. So
right, and that's kind of weird to even assume that a bunch of politicians are going to sit around talking about that stuff. I'm not saying politicians don't have the wherewithal, but it's just if I'm thinking about abortion, I'm not going to think about those 3 things of eliminating it, right? So
never contemplated.
Right. So so to wrap up the abortion topic, I was kind of surprised to see both in the House and the Senate some of specific politicians that voted no or didn't vote at all. I don't really want to call them out on this podcast. I'd rather have them on here and ask them specifically, but can you kind of speak to, because there hasn't really been a lot of information even behind the scenes that people I've talked to that could really attest to that. What's your opinion on why they said no or abstained from it in one instance?
Yeah, so I've been asked this many times since all that went down. So I had, surprisingly, I think it surprises some people, very little communication with the Senate side, from the House side to the Senate side. This was a bill that we did collaborate more on, people who were like-minded, on where we stood on the issue of abortion. Generally speaking, again, the way a normal bill works, you don't really work with the senators that much. until toward the end of session, our bills go there, their bills come to us, and then you start collaborating together. This was an issue because it was so important, and we started collaborating on more. So the group that I worked with, I can only really say where their heads were, and I was working with them because we were like-minded. I'm not going to speak for what other people did or didn't do, or how they voted or didn't vote. I mean, it certainly, it was certainly chaotic at times, and how everything was, there's a lot of stuff coming at us pretty quick there. So, but yeah, I wouldn't want to comment on why people did what they did or didn't do what they did.
Yeah, no, understood. Had to ask. But.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we'll try to wrap up here, and I briefly wanted to touch on kind of the student loan forgiveness. I actually wasn't planning on talking about this for the show, but it came up this week. A lot of people are mad that they've already paid off their loans, and they're giving away money now, right? So I don't know. My opinion on the matter is that keep that passion that you guys are mad about, all this inflation, all these extra taxes, because that's what's going to happen. They're going to take that canceled debt, and they're going to find a way to tax the middle class, and it'll hit us. Keep that passion. Go to the polls in November, right? But I don't know if you can talk about kind of your opinion on that, and Ross, you too.
Yeah, so I mean, I've certainly obviously heard about it. As you probably know, we have nothing to do with that at the state level, but I've heard a lot of people equate it to defense spending or the PPP loans that were given during COVID and things like that, and equating them, saying that if you took a PPP loan, for instance, that you have no right criticizing a college loan payback. I would just say to that, you can agree with the PPP stuff or not. You can agree with the amount of defense spending. You can agree, tax abatements are another one. Local governments a lot of times allow tax abatements. You can agree with that or not on whether that's good policy and whether those things should happen. I would just say that those are different things in kind, though, between someone, and this is my perspective on this, someone agreeing to take out a loan. You're basically making a contract there with someone, a bank or the government or whatever it is, that you're going to pay this money back, and then to not do that, I think is different than, again, the PPP thing was, the government unfortunately came in and said, you, business owner, are no longer allowed to work. We are going to shut you down. And then coming in on the backside, right? And then coming in on the backside and saying, okay, we're going to provide you a little relief on that. I think that's a different agreement when the business owner did not agree to have their business artificially closed down, and the government coming back in and trying to make that business owner whole is a different thing than a person deciding they're going to take out hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt and then not paying that back. And as you said, Jacob, there's nothing free, right? I had this conversation with my second grader a couple days ago. He said, we get free lunch at school. And I said, there's nothing free, buddy. Yeah, it is. It's free. It's free. He was positive it was free. It's not free. We're all going to pay for it at some point. Our kids are probably, are going to be paying for it,
right.
And so I have a strong opinion on it, and I disagree with it. I think that it's, I think it's going to be problematic in a lot of ways. So,
yeah,
I think when tax abatements, and I may add this because we're actually pursuing a tax abatement right now, it's looked at like a bottom line business transaction, a partnership. So when a county or an economic development is looking at a potential tax abatement for an investor, that is looked at a 5 or 10 year bottom line profit and loss. So with that abatement, the investor is able to provide or create value for the community.
Growth. Right.
Whereas it's a business transaction, and that does not compare at all to forgiving all the student debt, because half of the students they have a degree in something that's not even adding value to the country at all. It's just going to cause more money printing. And I mean, again, from a macroscopic scale, the United States, it's been a long, long, long time since we were not the world currency. And if the Federal Reserve continues to pump out money, sometimes up to $1 trillion a day, when the American dollar drops to nothing, and it will, because all fiat currency in history has gone to zero, all of it, whether it be a new global currency or whatever it is, the United States will not be the United States anymore if they're not the world currency.
Right. And so to give some more color to that, back in 2008 when we had the crash, Obama bailed out the rich, right? You know, people tried to say he was for the people. He was not for the people. He sided with the rich, and he bailed them out. So to wrap this conversation up, you know, we've been propping the crash in 2008 should have been a lot worse, is what I'm saying. But we propped it up, and we've been propping it up, the economy, ever since to create this kind of fake economy. So what that does is it creates a bubble, and when that bubble bursts, you're probably going to get probably the biggest crash that we've ever had, just because of 2008 wasn't done correcting before they got bailed out. Right?
Like a forest fire, if you don't have controlled burns every now and then, the whole thing will burn to the ground.
Right. So, okay. So I'll wrap that conversation up and leave you with this. And I have to give a special shout out to Jan Schuler Hicks. She's the GOP chairman, dear friend of mine and our families for years. But her husband taught me this trick when having conversations like this to leave people thinking with, and that is, you know, what's your top 10 favorite movies of all time? And you don't have to give 10 today, but if you could just name like your top 2 or 3, and what it does is it tells you a lot about a person, how they think, like what's their personality.
So Forrest Gump would be up there. The Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption. Some comedies would be Anchorman. You mentioned Anchorman earlier.
Yeah.
I really like Anchorman. The Caddyshack. Well, the first Caddyshack is one of those. So yeah, those would be a quick snapshot.
That's good. So like, you know, everyone listening, you know that your state representative, Mr. Lindauer, is casual, likes comedy just like the rest of us, right? So that's pretty cool. So with that, thank you guys for listening to our very first episode, our pilot episode, and we'll see you next time.